So over the next day, I'm going to show you how I have adapted and mastered the basic sourdough bread recipe that Jamie Oliver has on his website. Hopefully by seeing how it's done by a normal baker in the home kitchen, you can do a better job with your sourdough bread. So I'm starting off with the very basic sourdough starter here. Started it with instant yeast, didn't rely on wild yeast or anything, but I think over time, over several months that it's been growing, it's gotten enough of the wild yeast and the lactobacillus to give it a nice, good tang. So as you can see, it's just nice foamy. It's come out of the fridge. So first thing I'm going to do, and this is again my way of doing it. There are other ways to do it, but this is what I've found is very successful. Stir it up. Okay. Just make sure all that little liquid layer on top is stirred back in. And I'm going to feed it. So I'm going to feed it with 2/3 a cup of flour. This could be all-purpose, bread flour, whole wheat flour. In this case, I'm just using a little all-purpose flour, King Arthur. So I got 2/3 of a cup there. I'm now going to do almost 2/3 of a cup of water. So a 1/3 of a cup measure there. Go about halfway up. So that's another 1/6 of a cup. All right, now just sort of stir it around. You may wonder why I'm using a knife instead of a spoon or something more traditional. Why? Is because once I stir it around, so it's very good for scraping on the inside of these surfaces, all the way down to getting into the corners. It's real easy to just clean off. Yeah, I find that easier than a spoon for getting off that edge. All right. So this is now going to need to rest for about 4 to 5 hours for my starter. If yours is not quite as active, it may take a little longer. I'm going to cover it. In this case, I'm just going to cover it with a paper towel. That way keep any bugs out, but it also allows it to breathe, warm up. Remember, this is just come out of the fridge and it'll need to warm up. It's a warm day. It's going to be almost 90 outside. So again, your timing would be different in the middle of the winter. I'm just going to cover it with a paper towel. I'm just going to put that in place with a rubber band. Okay, now we're about 5 hours later. So there's several different ways you can test to see if your starter's ready, but I like the float method. So take a little spoonful, drop it in a glass of water. Does it float? Yes. So we are ready to mix our dough. And we're going to start off without any salt. So the first thing, definitely use a scale here. Measuring everything by weight is the most easiest way to be very consistent, and actually quite quick with using just one bowl. So I'm going to put in 325 grams of water, just like it says in the Jamie Oliver recipe. All right. Oops. I'm going to take just a little out. All right, just on the money. We are now going to add 100 grams of starter. So I do it a little differently. You know, the Jamie Oliver recipe has you do a levain overnight. I just go straight with the starter that I fed. I hit tear. Okay, 100 grams of this goes in. All right, that's 40. 98 grams, right on the money. Now we're going to put in 400 grams of bread flour. First I'm going to squidge this up. This is getting a little messy, so I would want to make sure you get your sleeves rolled up. I don't want to take off any rings because this is going to get really loopy in just a second. All right, so yeah, it's 100 grams of starter mixed in. We're going to hit tear. Now we're going to add 400 grams of bread flour. So we're using King Arthur here. grams. Here we're going to put in 100 grams now of whole wheat flour. You could do 400 grams of just spread flour, add a different flour, but the whole wheat flour I find adds a nice flavor, a little bit of nuttiness, a color. All right, so we're going to do 100 grams. All right. There, 102 grams, that's pretty close. All right, now comes the fun bit where we get to play with our hands, and we're just gonna mix this together until it's all thoroughly mixed. So scrape down the sides with fingers. Just make sure everything is fully moisturized all the way through. Don't worry about kneading. The idea is just to get this sort of into a shaggy mess. But one body, make sure there aren't any clumps of unmoisturized. It doesn't have to be perfectly even moisture. You don't want a clump that's got no moisture in it. And it will equalize out over time, but no sense making it do extra work. All right, that's pretty. This is sort of ugly, shaggy mess, but it will transform over the coming hours as we work this into something very different. All right, now I'm just going to cover it with a damp towel so it doesn't dry out, and let it sit for 1 hour, and then it'll clean up. Okay, now we're coming to the stage where we need to add the salt. So you can see this is still a pretty shaggy mess. And you're going to think, wow, that looks like it's going to be hard to work. But here I have 8 grams finely ground salt. I just take kosher salt, grind it up in the food processor. That helps it blend in easily. You don't have to worry about any large chunks of salt in there. And 25 grams of water. And it's going to look a lot different once I work this in. Okay, just start squidging it in, evenly distribute it. Okay, yeah. Just gonna make sure that salt all gets mixed up, and hey, presto, this is looking more like a pliable dough that we can start to work with. All right. I think that's enough. And then it just feels like some really loose Play-Doh or something at this stage. Not a real formed dough. All right, just cover it. Damp cloth again, and we'll come back in another half an hour. Okay, now we're going to do the first of 4 turning stages. So I'm going to take the dough, so you can see it's still sort of a sloppy mess here. I'm going to just dampen the hand, get a moist hand, just sort of scoop around in here, get it all loosened up from the sides. And I'm going to pick up the dough, pick up the side like that, and fold it over. Go to the next one around. Pick it up, let it sort of slop out, fold it over. This is still pretty fluid. It'll get a little tighter as we go on. Fold it over, and the final side, fold it over. All right, we're gonna do that 4 more times. I'm not gonna show it to you all, but I'll come back at the end when the next phase of shaping on the countertop and then letting rest in a proofing basket. All right, go back and cover with the towel and set the timer for 30 minutes. Okay, after multiple folding cycles for the dough, we now have something that's looking a lot more formed. Now we'll be turning it out onto the counter and roughly shaping it. So, you get a sifter full of flour here, ready to go. I'm gonna just scrape this dough out into the counter, just by hand there. Gonna coat the top with flour. My hands don't stick to it. And then just going to do a rough forming, just to get it to form a circle. There. I'm not trying to do too much to it, just to shape it. And then we're going to cover it again with the damp towel and let it sit for another 30 minutes. Okay, the dough's been resting for a half hour here under the damp cloth. Spread it out a little. It was sort of a nice compact shape. Just let itself out. Don't worry. What we're going to do now is thoroughly dust this top side. This is the side that's going to go into the banneton here. All right. What we're going to do now is carefully flip this over onto the back side. Okay. And now we're going to go one last stretch and fold cycle. This is where you can do something a little fancier like this. You know, just sort of getting that working, that nice surface tension. Oh yeah, you can see it. Yeah, if you look at that side, but we're just going to make sure we got plenty of flour in here so it doesn't stick. All right, so that's that. I am just going to cover this with a with a piece of saran wrap with a little bit of oil on it. Put that on top so it doesn't form a skin or dry out. And we're going to let that sit for 2 hours and put it in the fridge. So the next time you'll see this is tomorrow when we've taken it out, then we'll do the final baking. Quick word on bakeware, baking technique. Dough's over here resting. I use a cast iron Dutch oven. This is a Lodge basic, I think it's 6-quart Dutch oven. It's a bit big on the size for the loaf, but better a little bit big than too small. I'm not relying on the side walls of anything here to give me the shape for the final loaf, so it can be big. So this is going to go into the oven for preheating. I played around with a lot of different methods, some of which say put the bread in the oven, stick it in at 450. Some of those worked. It was a little longer time for the total cooking, but I just am going with this. I'm not doing the full. I've seen some recipes that say, oh, you need to let this sit for a half hour at temperature before it's fully up. As soon as it hits 475, I'm ready to put the bread in. And then it lowers to 450, and we'll do a combination of cooking with the lid on for 30 minutes and then off for 20 minutes. For this recipe, it's exact. I've checked the loaves every time. Every time it's right on at 210 degrees, which is the recommended minimum temperature. So it's now to the point where as long as I've got the temperature correct, I know that I don't even need to use the thermometer. But again, cast iron goes in. It takes about 15-20 minutes to preheat the oven. Bread goes in using parchment paper that I'll show you tomorrow to keep it from burning and sticking. It's also easier to lower it in as opposed to banging it in the pot and possibly losing some of the volume from the impact. You can lower it gently with the parchment paper, and you don't have any problem with sticking. Key thing: use good parchment paper. I've had experience with some where it burnt at 450. But the Reynolds parchment paper I found is very good. Maybe it isn't unbleached and everything that some brands tout, but it is very tough, hasn't burned. You could possibly even reuse it for a second loaf if you wanted. All right. Okay, we're back. So this is roughly 12 hours after I put the dough in overnight. You see it's puffed up just a little bit. Not a tremendous amount. It's not some sort of huge expansion of the dough, and you shouldn't expect that. The cast iron Dutch oven has been in the oven preheating about 20-25 minutes. Is ready. So now I'm going to prepare the loaf for putting in. First, I'm going to take off a piece of parchment paper, roughly sized for that. Gently turn it over. We don't want to collapse in the air. All right, let's come out of the banneton. I'm going to sprinkle a little additional flour on top, make it look real nice. Okay. Now I'm going to make a few slashes in the top. Not going to do anything incredibly complicated. but the idea is sort of shallow gashes about 1/4 inch deep at an angle to the bread dough, so not straight up, but sort of at an angle. I'm just going to do a couple around the edge here, over the top, and then on this side as well. Just give it a chance for everything to spring up, or release some of the moisture from the interior. Okay, so that's it for that. Now we're going to transfer it to the Dutch oven. My heavy-duty oven mitts. Just gonna put it right here on the countertop here. It's granite, so I can stand that. Now I'm just going to lower this into the Dutch oven. That is it. All right. That's going to go in. For a ½ hour with the lid on. 30 minutes, and we'll be back to take the lid off and see how it's doing. Okay, so our bread has been in the oven for ½ an hour with the lid on. I'm going to take it out and show you what it looks like now. Alright, you can see it's risen, the slashes have gone up, still sort of pale color, but we're going to put it in for another 20 minutes and it should be all beautiful and brown. Back in 20. Okay, the 20-minute timer has just gone off. We're going to get this loaf out of the oven and see how it all came out. All right. Put in the oven. There we go. So there, we've taken you from starter through to a gorgeous loaf of sourdough. If I can do it as a relatively inexperienced baker, you can too.